My grandfather was very interested in encouraging young and leading composers of his time to compose for the Jewish liturgy. And he commissioned people like Darius Milhaud and Ernest Bloch to write new music for Temple Emmanuel. He really hoped that in doing this, he would begin a movement that would lead to Judaism having its own musical tradition that would combine the best of tradition with the most innovative and heartfelt, I guess you could say soulful, he used the word mystical, feelings of music. He believed that music and worship were really the same thing, that music at its highest, when it was truly art, and he used the word aesthetic to describe the character of music that he was after, was the same thing as worship. And I think that his way of seeing spirituality and art as one thing is something that I fully believe myself, and is really the basis for all the work that I've done as a curator for the past 20 years.
Larry looked through the archive of his grandfather. His grandfather was a very influential, very well-respected community leader in San Francisco. He was a cantor of Temple Emmanuel for 50 years. He left a legacy of musical innovation. He is still beloved by the congregants. Larry never met his grandfather. The encounter between the two men happened in the archive at the Magnus.
I went through the archive and I saw many interesting things. There's correspondence with the composers that he worked with. There's all sorts of his notes on what constituted appropriate contemporary Jewish liturgical music. But the first thing that I saw that really struck me as something that I might be able to work with was this simple score. It says benediction, based upon a traditional priestly chant, but it has his name as the author, the composer.
Cantor Rinder composed a very short version of a traditional melody for the priestly benediction. The choir would sing it.
May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up. Looking through the archive a bit more, I put the pieces together and figured out that he wrote this particular score for a specific occasion. He wrote it in 1955 for something called a Festival of Faith, which was a huge gathering of people from all different religions that was part of the 10th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations. Suddenly I realized that I didn't have to display anything in the archive, and that in fact the best thing to do, at least from my perspective, would be to do something in the spirit of my grandfather, to build on his passions, his passion for commissioning new music for the Jewish liturgy, and his passion for bringing people of different faiths together. And I decided to use this simple prayer, the priestly benediction, these three beautiful, simple lines, as the text, or the libretto, if you will, for a new commission. I personally had been extremely inspired by classical Persian music. So I began to do research, and really through the wonder of the internet stumbled upon this composer, a really remarkable composer, Shahrokh Yadegari, based in Southern California, whose practice over the past 10 years or so has synthesized elements of classical Persian music, both performance and composition, with tools and techniques that are drawn from the most avant-garde Western traditions, specifically computer music, algorithmic composition, interactive sound installation. And I really felt that his approach, that was both steeped in tradition, had this strong spiritual and emotional and artistic element, but was also exploring the cutting edge of artistic practice, was something that would very much have appealed to my grandfather.
We discussed the idea of having perhaps musicians from different cultures working on this and having different voices. And we discussed the various ways of incorporating the priestly benediction, but also in contrast to that, there will be two poems of Rumi that will be heard in Persian and one in English. What Rumi talks about in there is how he's not necessarily of a single religion, that he's neither Christian, nor Arab, nor Jew, nor Muslim. How his religion is the religion of love. We came to the idea of finding ways to accommodate different voices. Some basic ideas have been laid out for the musicians, but not too many specific directions are given to them. And the idea is that different layers are created, but these different layers can work together. Once these are recorded, I will take these and create a collection of pieces, which a computer there'll be an algorithm that will decide to diffuse these in the space through 5 channels. The piece is not necessarily heard as a linear way of sitting and listening to a piece of music, but it's also a piece that changes the space that you walk into. When we think of music, we usually think of it as something of content, and we're listening specifically to that. But in fact, the idea with this, even while everybody does sing or performs very linearly, they also create a context for somebody to be there at times wanting to listen to what is there, or at times speaking with somebody else and just experiencing the space.
Initially, I had thought that this exhibition would consist solely of Shahrok's sound installation. But because the museum has such a wonderful collection of objects, Judaica and related materials from all over the world, I decided to look into what might be in the collection that related to either the priestly benediction or the history of Judeo-Persian culture specifically. And I found 2 pieces that I thought resonated really well with the musical project that Shahrokh was devising, and also because it helped give me a connection to the exhibition, because my background is in visual arts, and it gave it an additional dimension, which was very satisfying to me.
May the Lord bless you.
Well, what I hope for this project, and it's ambitious and perhaps overly so, is really the same thing that my grandfather hoped that people would experience when they came to the temple to hear music, which is that they would have a mystical experience, which is something very ephemeral. It's something that one almost can't plan or construct, that it inevitably involves some degree of happy accident, and it might happen to some and not to others, and the best one can do is to try to create the most opportune circumstance. And so what I've tried to do is arrange the pieces here to create the possibility for something wonderful to happen.